Hello, I'm Dan Gibson, and welcome to another video about archaeology and Islam. In this video, we're going to look at a writer who was writing at the end of the 7th century. So this will be right about the time that Ibn Zubayr had his rebellion, and then Hajjaj came down to settle that rebellion. So he is a contemporary of these events. The writer's name is John Bar Penkaye. He is not a Muslim. He is actually a Christian writing from a Persian perspective. When I say Persian, I mean the Church of the East, which was established in Persia. He was there in Persia. So that's somewhere in Iran over into parts of Iraq at the time when he's writing this. But he's writing it right when these events are taking place. He's got a whole history of the world. A lot of the attention that he gives in his various volumes that he does are focused on the Church of the East and the Church of the West and the events that were taking place between these churches. But in book 15, he comes to the Islamic era. And we're not going to go into this in much detail, but he basically concludes that the rise of Islam and the spread of Islam and the suffering of the church was due to God's punishment on the church, which was not truly following the ways of God fully with their whole heart, and a lot of side issues had come up and a lot of controversy had come up, and so he felt that Islam was a punishment on Christians designed so that God would wake the church up. But in the middle of all of that, he makes comments about what is happening in the world of Islam and the things that are happening in his day or immediately before it. He mentions Muhammad, so Muhammad is mentioned by name, but he picks up the story with the Umayyads and with Muawiyah, and I'll just read a little bit and we'll get up to the part that I want to focus on. This won't be very long. Okay, when Muawiyah ended his days and left the world, Yazid, his son, reigned in his stead. He did not follow in the footsteps of his father, but he loved children's games and the pastimes of the idle. The strength of men declined under his weak government, and God took him soon after. When he had thus left the world, there was one of them, one of the Arabs, named Zubayr. Now, this is Abdullah ibn Zubayr, who revolted against the caliphs who were in Damascus. That happened in 684, so during the time that John Penkaye is writing this. So we pick up the story with John Penkaye. He talks about Ibn Zubayr, and he's at Al-Zubayr, and he said he was able to remain independent until 689 when he submitted to Abdul al-Malik, who made his voice heard from afar. Now, Ibn Zubayr, he said of himself that he was come out of zeal for the house of God, and he threatened the West as transgressors of the law. So he went south into the place where there was a place of worship and settled there. A war with him was prepared, and he was defeated. And they even set fire on their own place of worship, and a lot of blood was shed. Now let's go back and look at that for just a moment, because we have Islamic history written down from this time. We've got Al-Tabari, who goes into quite a lot of detail. Other Islamic historians write bits and pieces about this time. So what is John Bar Penkaye saying about this that we don't have in Islamic history? Well, first of all, he's talking about Abdullah ibn Zubayr. That's the man who I say in around 70 AH after the Hijrah, about 70 after the Hijrah, I believe that Al-Zubayr moved the Black Rock from Petra down to Mecca. All the mosques that we've looked at in the database face Petra. 60 of these mosques face Petra in the first opening years of Islam. And so we have that, and then we have trouble that comes soon after this. But at the time of Al-Zubayr, all the mosques are facing Petra in Jordan. You can look at the Petra database. You can read the book, Let the Stones Speak. That's freely available in PDF format on the internet, on the website. So please avail yourselves of that if you are unfamiliar with the whole story of Petra and how many mosques face there and when there was a shift down to Mecca. Now, I have been accused of saying I've invented this, and there is no written evidence anywhere that Zubayr actually moved the Black Rock down to Mecca. So I want you to listen carefully through this. It says of Zubayr, he said of himself that he had come out of zeal for the house of God. This is Beit Allah. And so at this time, Beit Allah is the Kaaba, the building that I believe, and I show in the book where I believe that building was and where the foundations are still to this day of the Kaaba that was in Petra. And so you can read that. There's a whole chapter that goes and looks at that building, Beit Allah. And so he has come out of zeal for the house of God. Why? Because the caliphs have moved the rulership of the Muslim world from Mecca, from Medina, and have moved it up to a secular city, Damascus. It's not an Islamic city, but it is a secular city filled with Christians, filled with people from other backgrounds, and there are no Islamic buildings there. There are no great Islamic things. Those have to be built, and so Muawiyah and others start to build some of these mosques and other places in Damascus, but Zubayr is quite upset over this. The people in the holy city, which I believe was Petra, are quite upset. And so he has zeal for the house of God. And so he threatens the West. That's the way Penkaye puts it, because Penkaye is talking about the Church of the East, the Church of the West. And Petra was in the West, and Damascus was in the West as far as he was concerned. And so he talks about Zubayr threatening the West as transgressors of the law. That's Penkaye's take on the problem there was between Damascus and the people in the more religious cities of Mecca and Medina, Mecca being the name for Petra at this time. So, and then now listen to this, because John Penkaye writes this, and it's a very interesting statement. He says, so he, that's Zubayr, went south into a place where there was a place of worship, and he settled there. Now, what is this? This is a sentence that doesn't make sense in traditional understandings of Islam. Because if he was in Mecca and Saudi Arabia, where did he go south, and where did he settle, and what is this all about? Put the story in Petra, where I believe archaeology indicates this story took place. You can go to Petra, you can see the Kaaba, you can even see the ballista stones that were thrown at the Kaaba building. You can see where that Kaaba building was. Right beside it is the temple to Hubal, and right beside it is the temple, is the bathhouse, or Roman bathhouse, which we, in many writings, there are records of Muhammad apparently speaking and preaching in a bathhouse beside the Kaaba. A lot of those are claimed to be weak hadiths, because there is no bathhouse beside the Kaaba in Mecca, but there is in Petra. That's a very interesting point, but we won't pursue it. And so it says here that during this battle, remember the war went on for like 9 years. So this is a long, drawn-out battle. Penkaye's writing from a very far distance away. He's summarizing the whole thing in just a couple of sentences. And so he says, Abdullah Zubayr has got zeal for the house of Allah, which I believe was in Petra, that he threatened Damascus, and so then Damascus is going to send down an army and defeat him. So it says, Abdullah Zubayr, he then goes south and this is what I've been saying, around 70 AH, the Black Rock was moved from Petra south to Medina. So this is a long journey, and I don't believe that Abdullah ibn Zubayr went south. I think the whole thing took place in Petra. I could be wrong. Maybe Abdullah took the Black Rock, took his whole army, his whole entourage, and went all the way down to Mecca. And then maybe that was something that Hajjaj had to do, was take the army and march all the way down to Mecca. Could have happened that way, because Islamic history isn't clear at this point, because I think there's a lot of embarrassment over this civil war, what they were fighting over, and that Islam wasn't unified about even something as basic as where was the house of God. But here we've got Penkaye saying Zubayr takes the things that he has and moves south down to where there was a place of worship, and he settled people there. So that move south is very important to me. When I read this, it jumps out, because it makes no sense if there always have been talking about Mecca down in Saudi Arabia. Where was the move south? Doesn't make sense. Makes full sense if you're accepting Petra, and at this point there is this move south. John Penkaye, out of all the things that are happening, picks up on that and says there was this move south by Zubayr. But a war was prepared, and Zubayr was defeated. I'm just reading here from Penkaye. And then they even set fire to their own place of worship. He's speaking of the Muslims. A lot of blood was shed. If you read the events of Hajjaj and the siege of Mecca and all of these things that are taking place, there was a siege, there was fire that was put to the Kaaba building, and there was a lot of blood shed within the sacred place. So why are these things important? And why would he choose these to put in his history? Why would Penkaye do this? Well, one is the setting of fire to the house of God was a shocking thing. I think it was shocking for Muslims, shocking for everybody else. And the second shocking thing was not only that the Kaaba was burned, but also that blood was shed in the sacred place. This is Masjid al-Haram, and so in Masjid al-Haram there is a rule set up. There will be no shedding of blood in that sacred place. Around that sacred place were rocks that were put, big massive rocks. Go to Petra, you can still see them to this day. There's over 20 of these huge square blocks set all around to mark out the sacred area, and no shedding of blood was to take place inside that sacred area. But Hajjaj comes down, he burns the Kaaba, and he sheds blood in there, and Zubayr takes the Black Rock and moves it away. Those are the important events. Penkaye picks them out, and they are the most important events as far as we are concerned, looking at the Kaaba and looking at the Qibla direction of mosques. And John Bar Penkaye nails them right on and says this is what was going on at the time. Now, there are some who think the burning of the Kaaba could be referred to what some believe happened in 683. And so that's just moving things around about 10 years. It's unclear, reading Al-Tabri, when was the Kaaba burned twice? Was it burned once? Was it burned initially, and then was it knocked down with catapult stones later? Because in that 9-year war, when did these events happen? Al-Tabri is not very clear, and here it's not very clear. It seems to me that even after the war started, then they moved the Black Rock down. Now Hajjaj comes on the scene, and it says a war was prepared for Zubayr, and he's defeated, and then they set fire. I read it as this is Hajjaj fighting, and so this is absolutely contemporary with John Bar Penkaye, who is a monk over in Iran, and he is in Persia, and he is writing from the Church of the East, events that are happening, and he's heard this news, and he writes it into his history of what is happening in the churches. Just a couple sentences, but to me they support very clearly the whole idea that Ibn Zubayr was in Petra and he moved south, as Penkaye said, and that move, I believe, was down to Mecca, where they then re-established the center of Islam, and it was never moved back. Petra was destroyed, and then the whole thing in Mecca flourished after that. If you want to read more about it, look at the book, Let the Stones Speak, and it's free for you to download, and you can read through that. We've tried to footnote everything, lots of notes about where we pick things up. You can look at that. The bibliography gives you the full name of the books, the articles. There are a lot of Islamic sources are quoted, and so have a look at it. It's just a couple of sentences out of John Bar Penkaye, and I want to thank the readers and viewers who, one in particular who sent me an email and alerted me to this. I went back, I had lots of notes on John Bar Penkaye. I was looking mostly at names and other things, but when I went back to check something he thought was there and said it wasn't there, I went back to look because he had heard that people said that this said the Kaaba was in Mesopotamia. Went back, so there's nothing in Penkaye about Mesopotamia. I went back to look, and then this sentence jumped out, that Zubayr went south, and there he settled and the people, and that's just something that really jumped out at me. So, thank you for listening. This was very short, and this just shows you another source that we didn't mention in the book that supports the idea that Petra was the original holy city and the Black Rock was moved during the Second Islamic Civil War down to Mecca in Saudi Arabia, and then the rest of the story takes place in Saudi. Thank you.